The U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee just passed the Taiwan Policy Act, which would give over $4 billion in security assistance and treat Taiwan as a major non-NATO ally. Now, here to talk with me about this is Stanford University political scientist Kharis Templeman, who is also the head of their project on Taiwan in the Indo-Pacific. Well, Kharis, thanks for joining me. And I do want to ask you, first of all, about President Joe Biden's comment this week. In an interview, he said the U.S. would send troops to Taiwan if China attacked. What do you make of that comment?
Well, number one, it's consistent with what he said 3 other times during his presidency. So it's not just a throwaway remark. I think it reflects a sincere conviction on his part that he could and would and should put Americans in harm's way to defend Taiwan if it came to that. I would note that U.S. law and past policy actually gives the president a great deal of flexibility to decide how, in what manner, or even whether to intervene if there is a conflict over Taiwan. Ultimately, the U.S. defense backstop that Taiwan depends on for its security depends on who is in the White House and whether they are personally committed to defending Taiwan. So I think Taiwanese should be reassured that this president is willing to state repeatedly that he cares about Taiwan and he thinks it's in America's interest to intervene.
Well, I think it is interesting that the White House always has to walk back its policy, though, right? And say that nothing has changed, but he's actually not showing any strategic ambiguity anymore, right? He's saying that the U.S. would defend Taiwan.
Strategic ambiguity is intended to engage in dual deterrence. It's both to deter the PRC from moving on Taiwan, but also to deter the Taiwanese from declaring independence. From the U.S. perspective, that's not something we would support. And so saying he would defend Taiwan is a way to kind of tip or to weight the scales a little bit on this dual deterrence issue towards deterring China. The concern in Washington right now is not really that the leadership of Taiwan is going to steer Taiwan towards a de jure declaration of independence in the near term. The short-run concern is much more about the rising threat and the hard military threat that Beijing poses to Taiwan and Xi Jinping's potential willingness to use military force to achieve unification.
So I think that is why there is this Taiwan Policy Act, right? There's a lot more military assistance. What would you say is the most significant aspect of that act?
The military assistance is a big part of it. For the first time, we'd have foreign military assistance. So in the past, the United States has approved weapon sales to Taiwan. The Taiwan side requests sales, and the U.S. side then debates or considers those requests. Sometimes they approve them, sometimes they don't. This would be the U.S. providing, without any requests from the Taiwan side, a certain amount of military aid. Some of it loans, some of it in complete, just flat-out grants. That's a shift in U.S. policy. There's a couple other things there that I don't know. I don't know if they will make it into the final bill. The more symbolic parts of these, for instance, treating Taiwan as a major non-NATO ally, in effect, the U.S. already does that. So that's the kind of thing that has mostly a symbolic impact, but that gets Beijing really riled up. And so in my view, that's the kind of thing that really should not be in that act. We should be focusing on concrete, pragmatic, short-run things that can be done to increase Taiwan's ability to defend itself and focus less on the kind of high-profile symbolic things that just aggravate the CCP in Beijing.
So do you think that this bill, if it passes, will deter China or provoke China?
China gets provoked about everything that the United States does with regard to Taiwan. The question is, of course, they won't like it. They'll object. The question is whether the potential costs that they could pose on Taiwan and the United States are worth the potential benefits of the bill. And That remains to be seen. And it kind of depends on what is in the bill and what the PRC is willing to do to punish Taiwan in the U.S. But if we think of the PRC's kind of set of policy options to impose a punishment, they've already used a lot of those options. They've started using them in 2016 after Tsai Ing-wen did not accept the 1992 consensus. And so they're running thin. If we think of these as arrows in their policy quiver, they've used most of the arrows already. And so they don't have a whole lot of credibility when they say, oh, this time we really mean it. We really will threaten you. And so an increasing number of people in Washington see this as a non-credible set of threats. So that's the situation we're in now.
But China did elevate its military activity recently after House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit. What would you say of all that? Do you think that really means an increased possibility of war?
Well, not in the short run. I think these exercises were already planned. I think they had intended to roll them out sometime in the next year or two, and Pelosi's visit gave them an excuse to do it now. They have a couple purposes. One is to signal to the U.S. That they're very unhappy with the direction of our Taiwan policy. Another is to demonstrate that they have a much greater capability to engage in kind of joint maneuvering, say the Navy and the Air Force jointly in a particular exercise. They didn't have that capability 25 years ago during the last Taiwan Strait crisis. And third, it's to demonstrate that they might, in fact, be able to impose a blockade that the United States and Taiwan could not break. And so that we should respect and worry about their military capabilities and assume a more conciliatory position in this bargaining game that we're in.
And do you think that the U.S. is really concerned that China will attack Taiwan in the next few years?
I think the majority consensus in the Biden administration is still that an attack is unlikely in the next few years, but that the chances of an attack are growing, and that a lot of what the United States and Taiwan do, what the U.S. and Taiwan do today can actually materially affect the likelihood of an attack 5 or 10 years out. So a lot of the conversations happening now between the U.S. and Taiwan are focused on what can be done to lower the likelihood of an attack in 5 or 10 years.
Well, thanks, Kharis, for speaking with me. I've been speaking with political scientist at Stanford University, Templeman, who is the program manager of the Project on Taiwan in the Indo-Pacific at the Hoover Institution.